Hello Internet, my name's Frankie, welcome to the channel, and in this video we are building a habitat for a lovely pack of timber wolves. The first thing that I did for this habitat was to build the viewing galleries, and normally I will have quite large ones that allow you to see a very large portion of the habitat, but this time I wanted to have quite intentional and deliberately small viewing galleries that would allow you a peek into something that seems really big. This habitat in general is going to be really quite large, so having these small kind of windows to see through is, I don't know, I think it's a good juxtaposition between the size of the viewing gallery and then the size of the habitat. So to start building these habitat viewing galleries, I used some dry stone wall pieces. I'm going to be using the 1 meter tall bits to mark out the bottom edge. I basically just want to make a large rectangle that I can then fill with glass. So I'm using the 1 meter tall pieces on the bottom, and then the L-shaped kind of pieces at the edge, and more 1 meter tall pieces at the top, just to create a rectangular viewing gallery. Now, earlier I was playing about with trying to make a custom fence for this habitat, and whilst I do quite like the result that I got, it doesn't work for this habitat due to the variation in ground level. Now, this is something that I've been playing about with quite a lot in the temperate hills. We've got a lot of slopes and stuff. It's not very even around here, so making custom fences is quite a bit more difficult. But whilst I am not going to be using it for this habitat going forwards, I will bear everything in mind that I've learned from doing it for a habitat later on, because after temperate hills we're going to be moving on to potentially Africa or a tropical zone. Make sure you let me know in the comments which zone you'd like to see me build first. Speaking of, this is probably going to be it's almost the last video. We've got the update for consoles coming out on the 28th, which is going to introduce the Twilight Pack and the Aquatics Pack. Now, there is a raccoon coming from the Twilight Pack, and I want to add those to the Temperate Hills as well. So they will probably be the last habitat for the Temperate Hills, and then we'll be doing a tour of this area. I put it out as a poll on the community page for my channel, and a lot of you really like the idea of doing a tour of what we've built so far. So you can expect that in the next few weeks. Back to the build though, I'm nicking a piece from the fence that I made, and that is an overhanging bit on top that you see on fences at zoos fairly often to keep animals from climbing over the top. I've put it on the wrong way. Obviously you want this bit kind of pointing towards the inside of the habitat so that it would come back over the top of the animals, so it'd make it a lot harder to climb over. But yeah, put it on completely the wrong way here, making it nice and easy to climb over. But fortunately, wolves aren't exactly known for climbing, so this is just an aesthetic thing. We don't really need to worry too much. With these big viewing gallery structures built, I'm just going to put them in place, and here I'm going to have them kind of create a V shape around this path that we've laid out, and I will use some dry stone wall pieces to bridge the gap in between. And it allows quite an open space, quite a big part of wall that has nothing on it, which means we can come back later and decorate it and potentially name this habitat, because that's something I really haven't been doing in this zoo, but I think maybe I should go back and do it for the purposes of like decoration and stuff. Add a few signs to the habitats that would say like, I don't know, Beaver Creek, or I don't know. I shouldn't really be trying to come up with these on the spot because I will fail. But I could do an American Plains kind of sign for where the buffalo and pronghorn are, that kind of thing, if you know what I mean. So yeah, I think I might do that before the next video, and I'll show you a little update if I do get around to doing that. And whilst we have this V-shaped viewing gallery down the bottom here, we're also going to have one up on the higher end of this habitat that will allow you more of a sweeping view of the entire habitat. A bit less of an intimate one, and more that is going to strike a sense of wonder as you get to see the entire habitat from quite a nice position. Once I had tested the custom fence that I'd built earlier and figured out that it wasn't really going to work as well as I wanted, I decided to use the concrete barriers just to mark out the general shape of this habitat. Now, this is easily the largest habitat in our zoo so far, and the reason for that is that I want this to be quite a large pack of wolves, and it's going to have a fairly large natural feature that I want to incorporate, so it's going to need the space. And whilst I do start with this concrete barrier, I'm going to change it later. This is generally just to mark out the shape of the habitat. Now that I know where the habitat barriers are, where the edges are, I can start to work on these natural features that I wanted to include, and one of them is a waterfall. Now I'm going to use the terrain stamp tool with some large squares just to quickly raise up an area at the back, and this is going to be where our waterfall is. I'm going to hollow out our area in the middle, cover it with a glass barrier, fill it with water, then cover that with stone just to make it look more natural, and apply the necessary water effects to the top. If you want to see a more in-depth approach to building these waterfalls and how exactly I do it, I'll throw a card up in the video corner at the top of the video, and I'll also pop the link in the description down below so that you can watch my guide on how to build waterfalls. You can also see that I'm sketching out where we're going to be having the waterfall flow to. It's going to be like a little river in the middle of this habitat, which wolves are going to have to cross in order to either feed or sleep. We're going to have them on opposing sides to make sure there's plenty of movement in this habitat. Over at those viewing galleries, I take a glass barrier and run it through the open rectangles in the wall in order to make sure there is actually glass in there. Otherwise, these wolves are just going to be jumping out and eating all of our guests, and that is not ideal. On the plain wall near the back, we are just going to use a null barrier to make sure that it registers as a barrier to our habitat. And with that, the viewing galleries are ready. Once our wolves start to arrive, we can start to alter the terrain distribution and make sure there's not quite as much long grass. As the default for this map that I've chosen to build on, there is a lot of long grass, and these guys really aren't a fan. Now, I would like to replace most of it with short grass. However, they're also not the biggest fan of that. So I'm actually going to be replacing a lot with rock and soil. You can also see that they are very open to having snow in their habitat. In fact, there doesn't seem to be a limit on how much you can put in. However, I didn't want this habitat to stand out too much from the rest of Temperate Hills. I wanted to fit that kind of theme of being a lush and rich in foliage kind of habitat. And if I'm leaning into the snowy kind of thing, then it will just stand out too much. You'll have these really green habitats and then this really white habitat, and it just doesn't fit in too well. I might be doing an Arctic kind of area later, and if that is the case, we're going to have a designated area for these snowy habitats, which we could have because we've got quite a few animals that fit that kind of need now. We can have the Arctic fox, for example, rather than these guys, because these guys are obviously going to be over here. And with the aquatics pack coming later this week, then we are going to be having the king penguin added, which will be a great opportunity to create quite a wonderful winter wonderland. Now, when it comes to placing the rocks in this habitat, generally speaking, I've been sticking to one type, and that is temperate, to fit in with the Temperate Hills. However, in this habitat, I decided to mix it up a little bit and jump between temperate rocks and tiger rocks. And the reason for that is it creates a great contrast between the different types. It really helps it look a lot more organic by having these different types of rocks and different colours and stuff bouncing off one another. And I think they work quite well together as well. Shout out to Sparrow838 for this idea. She's been using it in her most recent builds in her incredible zoo. If you're not aware of that channel, make sure to go check it out. Now, another natural feature that I wanted to include in this habitat was a cave system. Normally, I will be creating a habitat house at this point or using one of the pre-made ones to make sure that our animals have enough hard shelter. But in this case, I actually wanted to make something a bit more natural. So to do that, I played about with the terrain tools, making sure to raise the ground enough and then flatten to foundation even, to make sure that the whole area is at a certain height. Once I'm happy with the height, I can start to use the push tool to start to carve into it and make sure that I go to begin with just in, and then once we are deep enough that way, we can start to go down. And then it's just a matter of smoothing out the area quite a lot to make sure that A, our bedding can go in here without clipping too much into the surrounding area, and B, to ensure that our animals can actually walk down the slopes and they're not too steep. Because otherwise these animals won't be able to make the most of this cave system that we're making for them. Now this really isn't anything fancy, it's pretty easy to do, and I would urge you to do it if you like the look of this. And this really is a really basic version of it. Playing about with these terrain tools in this way, in a way that I haven't really done so before, really makes me see the possibilities. There is quite a range of things that you can do with it, and I think you could make quite a nice and a lot more complex kind of area or cave system. I think it could be a really fun thing to do. Maybe we'll do that in the future, but for now we're keeping it nice and simple by having a cave with just 2 entrances that our wolves can go down and have a nice little nap in. And at the moment these caves are really weirdly quite smooth, and that's because of how we've obviously made them. So in order to make it look a bit more organic, a bit more realistic, and rough it up a little bit, we're going to sink a bunch of rocks into the surrounding earth. The bits that are supporting it and holding it up, the bits where the ground has fallen away. We want it to be chock full of rocks to make it look a lot more natural. And whilst we're using these rocks to roughen up the edges of our cave, it's always a good idea to use them to add a bit of variety to large open spaces and the edge of riverbeds. With the aquatic pack coming soon, we will have the small clumps of faux rock, which will look amazing sunk into the riverbeds because it will allow for a much greater variety in size, because we're going to be having much smaller rocks. At the moment we're dealing with these quite large ones, which is completely fine, but it's going to be good to have a bit more versatility in terms of the sizes that we can be using. But for now we're using quite large ones just to break up the riverbank and open areas in this enclosure. Before we get started on what is always the best part of any habitat build, the planting, we're going to start placing our enrichment items and food trays. And we're going to purposefully place a large food tray right in front of the viewing gallery to make sure that there is this nice intimate area. I say intimate in terms of the view that the guests are going to be getting. They're going to be getting right up close and personal with these animals they come to feed, and it is a very intimate kind of experience, I think, especially with wolves. They're going to be tearing at the flesh like mad. They're going to be feeding as a pack. It's going to be quite an experience to get to see up close like this. So I really like the idea of having it so close to the viewing gallery. And it helps utilise this side of the habitat. With such a large habitat, we really need to make sure that our animals are moving about and using the whole thing. So we're going to be spreading out our enrichment items quite a lot. That's something that you should always bear in mind when you've got a large habitat. Space out your enrichment items and make sure that your animals are going to be using the whole thing rather than just a few spots. Now, I'm not going to talk too much about the foliage that I place. I'm just going to let you sit back and enjoy. But my basic idea for it is to keep the plant life a lot heavier at the back, as if though this is the edge of a forest or something, and you're coming into a clearing, this nice open area where these wolves live. So the rear part of the habitat is much more densely covered. It's more like a forest. It's quite thick and full of life, and then near the front it's nice and open. So yeah, sit back and enjoy. Now, as I said earlier, I really wanted the viewing gallery area, the plain wall that's there, to be covered in a sign that kind of tells our guests what this area is. And we're going to call this Wolf Rock because it is quite rocky in there. There's a lot of open space, but we've got the cave system and the waterfall. There is a lot of rock going on as well. So I thought that's what I'd call this area. And to write that on the wall, we're just going to use the art shapes that are letters. And we're going to quite simply just write Wolf Rock. And either side of that, we're going to use some of the heads that I think are from the New World theme. The wolf heads, we're going to use those either side. Then in this grassy patch at the back in the middle, we're going to use a cluster of rocks and plants and stuff. And then we're going to use the stone statues of the wolves that you unlock by doing the main story in the game, the campaign mode even, or career mode, I can't exactly remember what it's called. Yeah, by playing the missions in this game, you will unlock statues of animals that you can then use in franchise mode. So I'd very much suggest if you want to decorate your outside of habitats like this, that you do that, because closer to the entrance of this zoo we have a roundabout kind of area where I'm going to be building little scenes, kind of like a diorama, that are populated with these stone statues. So having as many of these animals unlocked as possible is a really good kind of decoration. It really helps that area in particular. At the moment I think we've got the sea lion. We're using a saltwater crocodile instead of an alligator because the alligators aren't actually available, but I guess the message across. So we've got those two, the wolves, giant panda and the alpine ibex. We've got statues of all of those, so that is really good for decorating the temperate hills. Yeah, so that's just something to bear in mind. If you want these stone statues, maybe go back and play some of the career missions to unlock them. And once we finish up this lovely little kind of scenic area for our guests, this habitat is complete. So let's take a look. Thank you so much for having watched this video. If you liked it, please consider giving this video a thumbs up and maybe subscribing to the channel to see more videos like this on the channel appearing in your subscription feed. If you have any suggestions for what you want to see in the upcoming areas in this zoo, make sure to leave those suggestions in the comments down below. Thank you for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later.